Organizational units. In this nugget, we'll be discussing organizational units, which are quite easy to create, but you don't want to go around creating too many organizational units until you first have a design strategy. You have to understand some things about the way your company works, where various resources are located, who should be responsible for the various resources, and so forth. So the design strategy is an important thing to consider, and there's no single right answer for everybody, but I'll show you some things to think about at least. And then we'll actually go into the business of creating the OUs, which again is easy enough from the interface, and I'll also show you how to do that from a command line. And then delegation, which is a big part of organizational unit structure, will allow you to assign certain users and or groups permission to manage all or part of an organizational unit's responsibilities, such as creating accounts, resetting user passwords, that kind of thing. And you can be very specific over how much you allow other people to be able to do without having to give them too much control, such as adding them to the domain admin security group. Then we'll also take a look at moving OU objects, which again is easy enough through the interface, and I'll also show you how to do that through the command line. Let's talk a little bit about what these organizational units actually are. And if we go into all programs, administrative tools, and Active Directory users and computers, where we've been many times before, then we'll see that we have a single domain controller, or a single organizational unit created here by default. That's the domain controller's organizational unit. Other than that, there are no default organizational units. There's this Phoenix one, which I created later on after I promoted the domain. But this is the only one we have by default. And then these other ones are just containers. They are not OUs. That's an important distinction. Because a container, for example, cannot have nested inside of it other organizational units. So that if I right-click there and choose New, then I'm not going to be able to create a new organizational unit from here. However, if I go to a organizational unit like my Phoenix OU that I created earlier, then I can right-click here and choose New Organizational Unit, and I can nest one organizational unit inside of the other. So that's something that's important to understand in terms of the hierarchy of these containers. Another thing to understand is that I have no ability to assign a group policy object to a container like this. That if I go to the properties, there's really nothing there. The only thing you do is give it a description if you want, an optional description. Whereas if I go to an organizational unit like Phoenix, and if I choose its properties and go to group policy, then you see that I've got a policy here already, and I can add additional policies. Now, in terms of what policies are, again, we're going to discuss that later on. In fact, we're going to address that right after we discuss our organizational units in an upcoming nugget. But on the other hand, organizational units and group policies really have to be addressed kind of hand in hand, because that's a big part of the reason why we even have organizational units, is for those group policies. Now, what I like to do is I like to create an organizational unit somewhere, depending on the company that I'm working with and the kind of structure that they have, some kind of an organizational unit that will have just a quarantined users, quarantined computers, or just I might use a different word because that sounds like viruses, but a locked down users or computers container. And because the reason for that is because by default, anytime you create a new computer account, it just gets dumped into this computers container. And if you create new user accounts from a command line, they usually just go into this users container, neither of which have any kind of group policy that locks those users down. Well, I might just have unleashed a user that's careless or that it's malicious onto my network with all kinds of things that they might be able to do without any restrictions, because their account is here and their computer account is here, and I don't have any way of applying policies to them. And this is particularly true of computers, because when you go to a workstation like Windows XP or Windows 2000 Professional Workstation, and you go to the computer properties, to the system properties, and join it to the domain, it by default just dumps it into this computers container, and that's how a lot of those accounts are created. Now with users, that doesn't happen quite as often, because user accounts are normally created through an interface like this, or through something like a command line utility like DSAdd, where you will have to specify exactly which container you want it to go into. Let me give you an example of how these can be created and automatically dumped into containers that don't have any restrictions on them. First of all, if I just use something like net user add, and then I just add a user account. So if I had a user account named Joe, for example, from a command line, and press enter, it says the command completed successfully. Did it put Joe? Well, if we refresh the users container here, we'll see that it indeed put Joe in this container, which has no capability for group policy. Therefore, Joe, in some respects, is unrestricted in terms of his desktop environment and some of the things that he might be able to do. Same thing's true of computer accounts, which is going to be more common because we join those computer accounts from the desktops, and it automatically dumps into computers, but you can also do it from a command line. So if I enter in something like netcomputer and then the name of the computer and then /add and press that and enter that, then we see that in the computers container, if I refresh that, it's now put in that computer account, which again is unrestricted. Now what we might prefer to do is, instead of creating these user and computer accounts and then dumping them into their default containers, to put them in an organizational unit that has like the mother of all policies on it. And as a brief tangent, let me show you how you can do that from a command line, and that is to use a reader USR command and a reader CMP command. USR being user, CMP being computer. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and delete these accounts, and I'm going to recreate them after I've run that command, and you'll see that they'll now automatically get dumped into the Phoenix organizational unit. And I simply specify that because that's the only other one I have at the current time. So I'm going to go ahead and do reader user, and then I'm going to enter in the distinguished name. So I'll enter in OU equals Phoenix, dcnuggetlab.com, and then I'll do the same thing for the computer account. I'm just going to enter in reader CMP. And it's also going to put new computer accounts into the Phoenix OU. And now, once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and recreate the user account and the computer account from a command line. Now then, after having recreated those accounts, we go to the Phoenix OU, and we see that there's client 47, there's Joe. It dumps them in there, even from a command line. When I create them from a command line using NetUser or NetComputer, that's where they'll go now. Now, apart from things such as group policy objects, let's go ahead and take a look at other purposes for organizational units. And one of the main things they're used for, really, in their purpose, is just a logical collection of resources. This is so that an administrator can easily scan through and identify users and computers that might be grouped according to a geographical region. For example, I might want to find a specific user in the Phoenix OU because that happens to be where they work and where they have their user account. Well, it makes it easier to search through that. Other things you can do is to search through the resources using other methods, such as the search facility that you have from within Windows. For example, I could go to the search command here, and I might say, I want to find a specific printer. And I could go down here to look for other search options. I could look for printers, computers, or people. I'll look for a printer on the network. And what I want to be able to find is, just any printer for the time being. Let's just click Find Now. And we see that we now have a printer located in Phoenix that I can install or print to. Well, of course, we could even find that printer even if it was not put into the Phoenix organizational unit, but it's really an Active Directory function that gives us that search facility. And then we also have the ability to hide resources. What if that printer was very expensive? Maybe it was a color laser jet. We didn't want people printing out their garage sale flyers on it or something like that. Well, a number of different things we could do. First thing we could do is just assign the appropriate permissions to that printer so that not just anyone can print to it, but we might also not want people to even realize that it exists within the building. Maybe it's just in a little small area within our building that we want only our graphic artists to use. Well, what we could do is to also assign an ACL on a specific organizational unit that prevents people from even having the list permission to that organizational unit. So you can use it to hide resources as well. It doesn't happen very often, though. It's a little bit rare, but it's certainly possible. The big thing, and these are in no particular order, by the way, the big thing is really administration. This is not for your users. You do not configure organizational units so that users can double-click their way through them and find other user accounts and computer accounts and things of this nature. In fact, most of your users probably won't even know what organizational unit their account is in. Organizational units are administrator tools. They're just ways of collecting your resources, managing them, using things like group policy objects to manage what your users can and cannot do, to manage the behavior of your computers. And again, group policy kind of goes hand in hand with the discussion of organizational units. It's really a big part of, and probably the most powerful thing that we have with organizational units is the fact that we can have group policy. There's also an issue of delegation. Now that's a big issue, especially in medium to larger organizations where one administrator can't possibly do everything within the organization. And yet at the same time, I might want somebody who's not really a techie person. I want them to be able to do certain kinds of functions. Maybe there's a manager of a certain department that ought to be able to reset users' passwords without having to call the help desk every time someone forgets their password. Well, we can delegate control of just that one item if we want to. Now, one thing to keep in mind, especially if you're coming from a Novell environment, is that organizational units are not for security purposes. And that's a little bit different than your Novell environment, because Novell also uses an LDAP architecture. And they are able to use their OUs for security purposes. So, for example, if this was an Novell infrastructure, we could take a Phoenix OU and we could assign that to an ACL on a file share, for example. Well, in Active Directory, we don't do that. That's why we create these groups over here from a previous nugget. This is what we use to assign on an ACL, not the actual organizational unit itself. That seems like a little bit of a drawback because it'd be kind of handy to take that organizational unit and assign it to an ACL, but that's just not how Microsoft designed it. Now, to create an organizational unit, you can probably understand how to do that because you've seen me do it in the past, but you simply right-click on the domain here, or really it's the same thing if I just right-click in an empty space over here, and I'll just create a new organizational unit. And you just name it is all you have to do. I'm just going to name one Benson. I have a site named Benson. Maybe I'll have some users down there as well. That's pretty much all there is to it. Now, if I have some users up here in Phoenix or computer, maybe I have this account here and this account here that are actually in Benson, I can click and drag those accounts. If I can just click the right thing here, there we go. Click and drag them into the Benson OU. By the way, that's a new thing that we weren't able to do in Windows 2000 is to drag and drop in the interface. And I think Microsoft originally didn't let us do that in Windows 2000 because they were afraid that we would take something and accidentally drop it onto the wrong thing and cause a catastrophic kind of a problem. So we see here now that in the Benson organizational unit, I've got my accounts because I dragged them in there. Now, likewise, that's how you create an account, but likewise, if you want to delete an account, you can hit the delete button. If it says, are you sure you want to delete this object? You can say yes, but it also warns you that this contains other objects. Are you sure you want to do this? And this could take a long time if you got dozens, hundreds of accounts in there. We'll go ahead and click on yes because we're not going to actually use any of those. Now, another way to create those organizational units, if I want to, from a command line, I can do that as well. I can use a command called dsadd. And if you've seen any of my other videos, you've seen that I use dsadd extensively to create a whole batch of user accounts at once. Well, you can also use it to create organizational unit. So, for example, if I wanted to create the organizational unit of Benson, I'd do dsadd OU, and then OU equals Benson, DC equals Nugget Lab, DC equals com, and press enter. Now I've got my Benson organizational unit backend. There it is. Now, another thing I could do if I want to delete that is I could use a similar command, dsrm for remove, to delete the organizational unit of Benson. And I press enter there. Are you sure you want to delete that object? I say yes. And now if I, again, refresh the screen here, we'll see that the Benson organizational unit has gone away. So you can use dsadd, dsrm to go ahead and add and remove organizational units as necessary. And then just a little bit of a tangible, kind of a free bonus if you want, but if you want to also, I'm going to go ahead and point out where you can also use an organizational unit here if you want. I've got a file here called createous.vbs. I'm going to go ahead and right-click on it and choose Edit. And I'm going to put this on nuggetlab.com for you so you can download it for yourself if you want a good example of how to create an organizational unit. Now, you're going to be looking at this and you're saying, oh, great, James, as if I don't have to learn enough. Now I've got to learn Visual Basic scripting. Well, not necessarily. First of all, VB scripting is a pretty simple scripting language. Some of it looks a little bit baffling, but generally speaking, if you look at this, you can kind of make sense of it as you go. And the only thing we need to really do is to go down about this far. That's the only first few lines we need to work with. The rest of these are just repetitive to create different organizational units. And then anything that starts with this semicolon here is just going to be a commented item. That's not a semicolon, is it? That's a quote mark. It has a single quote mark. Anyway, I don't know why I said semicolon. But it's a single quote mark as a comment item. This tells me that I'm going to set the domain naming context to nuggetlab.com, and that's how I do it by using the set DNC equals the domain naming context to nuggetlab.com. And then this next line here would just create an OU. That's what the comment says, and this is where it does it. Set new OU equals, and then the domain naming context, whatever the domain naming context is, which has already been established. So we're going to create an OU of Tucson in the previously established domain naming context, which is nuggetlab.com. And it's going to be named Tucson, and then this set info thing simply kind of is like clicking OK and actually enacts that function. So it actually turns it on or creates it. And then this is kind of an option here. I just send in a message box here that says a Tucson OU has been created. And when we run this Visual Basic script, we'll see that it goes ahead and runs. And then all the rest of these are just repetitive with different names of different organizational units. Now let me also point out another thing here, and that is that in this script, it's going to create a computers OU. Can you think of a problem with that? Yeah, there's already a container called computers, and it's not going to let me create this. In fact, the script will halt right at the point where it tries to create computers. So what I've done here is I've gone to the computers container, I've just renamed it default computers. You don't have to do that. I'm just showing you why the script might fail. So I'm going to go ahead and close this. Then I'm going to go ahead and run the script, which should run just properly now because I've gone ahead and renamed that computers container. We'll go ahead and double click on this. And it's telling me that Tucson, Bisbee, computers, printers, admin, sales, production, have all been created, and if I go into the nuggetlab.com domain and users and computers, refresh the screen, we see that it has now created all of those organizational units. Now, I don't know, I may or may not keep all of them, I might rearrange them, but I want to just show you that a script can create these organizational units for you, and it's not too hard to do. Well, once you figure out that you need organizational units, now you got to figure out how to create them. I mean, not how you right-click and choose new OU. I mean, where do you create them? What do you name them? How do you categorize them? I mean, it's certainly possible to have disorganized organizational units. Let me first of all tell you a way that you don't want to do that, and that's just to mirror some kind of an org chart. Because if you take a look at this, for example, this really reflects just people. I mean, you got your chief executive officer, chief operations, financial, and information officers down here. Well, you don't want to just create an OU for that one user account and for their laptop probably, or for each one of these users. I mean, after all, really, in an administrative function, these are just user accounts. There's nothing special about them as far as their people goes, other than the fact that they make maybe a few $100,000 a year more than you might. But in terms of administration, we administer them probably much the same way that we do for anybody in the legal department or in purchasing or anything like that. And that again will go to possibly your group policy objects, because you might have a GPO that distributes applications to these people, or that restricts certain parts of the desktop. So it doesn't really make any sense to create OUs that look exactly like your org chart. Instead, what you might do is to create them according to an amalgam of a number of different possibilities. For example, here I've got a domain with geographic distribution in its organizational units. Now, this might make some more sense administratively speaking, because if you're a large organization with multiple sites, you might have a West Coast, you might have an East Coast, for example. You might want to have an administrator responsible for configuring site properties for both of these individual sites, Phoenix and Los Angeles. Therefore, if I delegate permission to this OU, then by inheritance, whoever the administrator that gets this OU will by inheritance also control Phoenix and Los Angeles. And then this administrator for West can also subsequently delegate or subdelegate, if you will, additional people, help desk and other IT folks and so on, to help manage the OU down here in Phoenix and to help manage the computer accounts and the user accounts and things like that. So this kind of an OU structure might be useful if I have administrators in different physical regions of the country that I want to have responsible for various regions. Now, this is also simplified in the sense that I haven't included every detail. For example, under Phoenix here, I'll probably have a couple of other OUs here. This one might be for computers. This one might be for users. And I'm going to have different group policy objects on these respectively. And then underneath computers here, I'm kind of running out of space, but I might have additional OUs underneath that even. I might have this for, desktop computers. I might have another one for laptop computers. I might have another one here. I'm running out of space here, but another one for servers. That kind of thing. And then I might have additional levels of delegation underneath this. So I might have one or two administrators that are responsible for any computer in the enterprise. Then I might just have my help desk responsible for my desktops and my laptops, and then higher-end administrators responsible for delegating these servers over here. And we'll talk about delegation a little bit more in our organizational unit topic here. Let's take a look at another example here where I'm designing this according to business units. So I have an administration department that's responsible for HR and managers. Here's sales, has marketing, inside and outside sales, production, has a factory floor with shipping and receiving for our various kinds of parts, for example. Now, this might make use if I have different kinds of purposes for, let's say, my factory computers. If I've got computer accounts that I'm putting into this factory OU, and these computer accounts are managed by different administrators than my marketing and then my sales and my HR departments. If that's the case, then this would make sense. On the other hand, if all of my computers are pretty much managed by the same people, and they have the same applications that deploy to them, and they have the same kind of delegation requirements to my computers, then it wouldn't make any sense to have computers in each one of these different departments and then have to assign delegation to each one of these organizational units separately, because I would really be just repeating my work. For example, if it's the help desk department that's responsible for all the computers in every single one of these OUs, then I'd have to assign that delegation, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different times. So if those computers have the same kind of job function for the users, if the same people are administering them, this would not make sense. On the other hand, if each one of these has different purposes, maybe the factory floor computers are highly controlled kiosks that require different administration from different administrators, and they have different set of policies that apply, they have different applications that are automatically going to be deployed through group policy than, say, my marketing department, then in that case it would make good sense to split this up. Really, there's no hard, fast answer. It really depends upon what kind of an organization you have and who's responsible for what and what your users require. Now, if I do have the common usage, then I might make this according to resources instead. Where, for example, if I have a help desk that's responsible for all of the computers, then I might just assign the help desk delegated permission over these computers. And then they can add and remove workstations to this OU. I might be able to set up different group policy objects that would deploy, for example, different required applications to these workstations, but these laptops don't need them, and then these servers don't need either one of these kinds of applications, but have a totally different kind of requirement for the applications that we deploy to them. Well, that's where it would make sense to create a computer's organizational unit, and then I might delegate permissions to a higher level administrators here, and then by inheritance, they would inherit control also of each one of these subsequent OUs. And they might assign different group policies to each one of these OUs as well, so that they receive different levels of control and different applications. Let's take a look at another example of how this could be bad design. It doesn't have to be, but it could be a bad design. Here I've got Phoenix, Tucson, and Bisbee organizational units. And underneath that I have a user's container and a computer's container, organizational units. And I have administrators here responsible for the users and computers. The thing is, if the same administrators have responsibility for these users and computers and these users and computers, and maybe the administrator works in Phoenix, but they remote desktop or remote control through some other third party, all of the computers in Tucson and Bisbee, then it doesn't really make sense to create these separate organizational units. Instead, we might just as well create a single organizational unit for users and put all of our users into the same users organizational unit, and a single computers container and put all of our computers into the same computers container. And by this, I'm not drawing these arrows to nest computers OU inside of a computers OU. I'm going to take the accounts, the computer accounts and the user accounts respectively, and to place them into a single organizational unit instead. And then what I would do is I would take whoever's responsible for this Phoenix OU, whoever the administrator is, and then delegate control for them to this OU for the users or to this OU for the computers. That way I really have a single set of operations in terms of delegation and group policy assignment and all that kind of stuff, and instead of having to repeat it here and then down here and then down here and then over here and then down here and then down here, and doing the same repetition over and over again. And then if I were to do that also, then it would make sense not to have this organizational unit named Phoenix. I would probably name it something else that identified what department these users and computers were in. For example, accounting or something like that. So that's just an example of how it could be good design or bad design, depending, again, upon who's responsible for all of this stuff. And let's take a look at another example of what could be a bad design. In this example, I have a marketing department, and somebody thought of taking a marketing department and making it a top-level OU because we have a marketing unit in all of these different geographical locations in Phoenix, Tucson, and Bisbee. Well, you see, if I have separate administrators for each one of these OUs. Maybe I've got a group of administrators in Phoenix and a separate one in Tucson and a separate one in Bisbee that manage the user and computer accounts and everything else that we have down there. Then this might not make sense because remember, inheritance will allow me to delegate control over an OU up here at the top level and have that person inherit control over all of the sub-OUs. Well, what if it just so happens that a person here in Bisbee, an administrator here, is delegated control over the marketing OU? Well, if that happens, then by inheritance, they will also inherit control over Tucson, inherit control over Phoenix, and that's not the behavior that we want. Now, we can block that inheritance, but then it gets to be complicated, and every time you find yourself having to block things explicitly, you have to really take a hard look at your design and see if it's in the most efficient manner. Here's another example of where this might be poor design, and let me kind of clean up here a little bit. In the marketing OU, we might have a specific application that we need to apply here. So we'll take a group policy, and we'll apply a group policy that includes the application. It can automatically install the application on all the computers in the marketing department. But other users in all of these respective cities, the accounting department, the legal department, all that, they don't need this same application that's deployed by the group policy. But just like user delegation, where they inherit the ability to delegate control over all of these different sub-OUs, the group policy also flows on down through and it will apply to all of these sub-OUs as well. Therefore, I'll be getting people in the legal department in Phoenix receiving that same application that they don't really need. People in Tucson in the marketing department will receive it, but then I'll also have other people, in operations that don't need that application. Well, then we have another problem here because we have too many people, again, receiving the application that don't really need it. So in this case, what might be better is to configure this whole thing in a different way. So one thing I might consider here then is I might restructure this. What if the marketing department is only in Phoenix? Well, if that's the case, I'll probably take this whole marketing department and move that organizational unit down here underneath Phoenix so that it's a sub-OU of Phoenix. Then I'll have whoever the administrators are who have delegated control over Phoenix will automatically inherit the ability to have delegated control over the marketing department as well. And then I can take a group policy object and apply it to just this marketing department and not have to worry about it flowing down like it does right now, and where it flows down to these other cities and these other departments. Well, we don't have to worry about that now because it is created here and it stops here. Now, on the other hand, if there was a marketing department in each one of these cities, I wouldn't necessarily want to create a marketing OU under each one of them. Instead, what I might do is just take this, again, the single marketing OU, and instead of making it a parent organizational unit to these children, I would simply put it on the same level as all of these other children here, and I would then put my marketing department or my marketing OU here on a peer level. Then I could delegate it, so maybe I have an administrator here that I want to be responsible for the marketing OU. Well, I can delegate control for that individual administrator to the marketing OU, and then I can put a group policy on this that, again, doesn't flow down to anybody else kind of accidentally, and then it just applies only to that OU. And this kind of also shows an example where you don't have to exactly mirror the way your organization is, like in an org chart fashion, with your actual physical geography. For example, even though I have a marketing department in each one of these cities, I don't have to put a marketing OU under each one of them. Since they all receive the same administration by the same people, and they all receive the same applications through group policy, I'll just put them in their own OU here and manage them separately. Now here I've divided things up into a Phoenix OU where I've separated out computers, printers, which we don't see any right now, and I'll explain that after a bit, and then users down here. And these are many of the accounts that we've already worked with in the past. Now, I need someone to be in charge of this Phoenix OU, and I need someone to be able to reset passwords for the users, possibly to create accounts, to join computers to the domain, all of those kinds of things. So what am I going to do about that? Well, first of all, I've got two different organizational units here that we can draw from. The first one is my admin organizational unit, and in that I have the Phoenix Admin Security Group and the Phoenix Admin 01 account. Now the Phoenix Admin group here is not going to be a member of domain admins because I don't want anybody that's a member of this specific group to also have total control over Tucson or Bisbee or any of these other OUs. So what I've done is I've taken the Phoenix Admin 01 account and I've joined it into the Phoenix Admins Security Group, which you see right here, and that's a global group. Now, I want anyone who's a member of the Phoenix Admin Security Group to have total control over only the Phoenix OU. Now, let's go ahead and delegate that control, and to do that, I simply right-click, choose Delegate Control to start a handy little wizard, click on Next, and then I select the security group to which I want to delegate control. So it's Phoenix Admins, and I'm going to make it Phoenix Admins right here. Click OK, and now I've chosen that security group. Now you saw that I could have also chosen an individual user account as well, but we'll just use the common practice of doing this administration by security group instead of by individual user. And then if I need anybody else to be able to have the same responsibility, of course we'll just add them to that security group. Then what do I want them to be able to do? And for these purposes, I've checked just about everything that any common administrator would do for a user account. They can read the information, which actually most users can read all the user information anyway, or most of it. Then we can create, delete, and manage user accounts, reset passwords. Those are all common things that a daily administrator would have to be able to perform. Modify group membership, manage group policy links, and do all these different kinds of stuff. The only thing I didn't mess with was the inet org person, which is only going to be necessary in a mixed environment where we have some other directory service that we need to interoperate with. So I'm going to go ahead and just select all those items that you just saw me do. I can also do a custom task. I'll show you that in a little while. Click on Next, and then I'm going to go ahead and just click on Finish, and that's pretty much all that I need to do. Now, anybody that is a member of that specific group, Phoenix Admins, such as this user account right here, will be able to take some certain level of control over the Phoenix organizational unit. And then having finished the wizard, let's take a look at why someone who's a member of Phoenix Admin Security Group will be able to have full control over this Phoenix OU. And actually, it might not be totally full control, but it's most functions that any administrator would normally do on a day-to-day basis. In order to see that, what we need to do is to look at the properties of this OU and to look for a security tab, which if I click on properties right now, I'm not going to see it. The reason for that is because you have to go to a view, and then you have to go to advanced features. Having done that now, if I go to the Phoenix properties for this organizational unit, we now see a security tab right here. And then if I scroll on down, we'll see that the Phoenix admins does have a certain level of control over this specific organizational unit. And then if we click on the Advanced tab, which you're only going to be able to see because there are special permissions here, so those will appear in the Advanced tab. And if we take a look here, then we'll see that they have the ability to generate resultant set of policy, which we'll look at in a future nugget. That's so that you can see what kinds of policies apply to a certain user and or computer combination. You can create or delete groups or users, all different kinds of things like this over this organizational unit. Now, we could, if we really wanted the Phoenix admins to have absolute full control, we could just do that in terms of permissions. You just click the checkbox here for full control, and they would have it. But for the time being, we'll just go ahead and leave it as is. Now, let's go ahead and make a remote desktop connection to Client 01. Now here I've logged on as Phoenix Admin 01, but prior to that I logged on as the trainer account because that's my domain administrator account. And if we look at the computer management console, we'll go into the security groups under local users and groups and go to groups, and then go to the administrators where you can see that I've added into this the Phoenix admins security group. And the reason why I did that was so that those Phoenix admins would have total control over this computer as well. They can change the system time, they can defragment the hard drive, they can add remove programs, all those kinds of things, add devices and things of this nature. And the only reason why I did that was because this might be something like a Phoenix admin's workstation where he or she will need to be able to add or remove certain kinds of programs. Now, one of the kinds of programs that they'll probably need to be able to work with is going to be the administrative tools. Now, one of the programs I would install in order to get administrative tools that I need for this, for Active Directory functions, would be adminpack.msi, which is located in the i386 directory of the Windows Server 2003 source files. Now, once you've double-clicked and launched that program, which I've done at some point in the past, and as long as you've added administrative tools to the taskbar properties to your Start menu, then you'll be able to see many of these tools, such as Active Directory users and computers, and many of these other administrator tools that you would not normally have been able to see. So we'll go ahead and launch this and take a look. Here, for example, we have the Phoenix organizational unit, and I can go in here, and even though I'm not a domain admin, I can now right-click on Phoenix users, I can choose new, I can choose a new user. Notice that I cannot create a new organizational unit because I don't have that level of control. If I wanted that, then some administrator would have to provide me full control over this OU or more granular control to be able to create organizational units. In any case, now I can create a user, and we'll just fill in some information here, do the normal stuff that we do, and then just next and finish. And now this user account, again, which is the Phoenix Admin 01 account, which is the member of the Phoenix Admins Security Group, which has been delegated control over the Phoenix OU, now has the ability to create accounts like Phoenix User 01, Phoenix User 100, which I just did. So let's take a look at some of the things this user can and cannot do. They could reset the password. That's a very common function that they're going to have to do, and which I'm sure you've done many times. And I could use the common practice to tell the user to change the password at the next logon. Password has been changed. Easily done. Okay, what else could I do? By the way, notice that I did that on the Phoenix users organizational unit, but I delegated control over the Phoenix OU. Now, that's because the reason why I'm able to do that at this level is because, again, it flows down by permissions. Similar to the way NTFS permissions flow down to their child folders, this kind of permission on an OU also flows down. That's why I'm able to manage this. Now, you can also right-click here and choose Properties and go to Group Policy. Now, it looks like I could create a new group policy of my own here, but as soon as I click on New, we see that access is denied. I don't have quite that level of permission, but I could click on Add, and I could go to All here, for example, and I could link an existing group policy object here. Now, this was already being applied through a higher level because it applies at the NuggetLab.com level and flows down to Phoenix and into the Phoenix users. But if I wanted to link one, then my point here is I just click OK, and I've linked the policy here then. Now, if I don't want to link one, I do have the authority also to delete the links, so I can click Delete. Notice that I can remove the link from the list, but I cannot delete the group policy object itself permanently. Again, that's because I only have a limited scope of authority right down on this Phoenix OU and on its children. Now let's see what else we could or could not do. Maybe I wanted to go to the Tucson organizational unit. Ooh, looks like I can get there. I can right-click here and choose New Nothing. So I can't really do much of anything else. I can't choose all tasks and create a new user. I can't do anything like that. I can't really delegate control. It gives me the option on the right-click menu, but it tells me I don't have permission. Really, there's not much I can do at all with this Tucson OU because, again, I don't have security permissions to be able to do that. I've only delegated it on this Phoenix OU and all of its children. Now, going back to the actual domain controller itself here, where I'm logged on as the trainer account, which is my domain admin account, let me point something else out about this. You see, my Phoenix admin's account up here in the admin, my Phoenix admin security group, and the user account are up here in admin. Why aren't they down here in Phoenix users? Well, the reason for that is because if I delegate full control and they can change membership, in other words, if I took these accounts, let me just drag them into here now, just to illustrate this. Now, you see, they have full control over this parent and all of the children. This means then that they could change their own membership in the security group of the Phoenix admins. They might say, hey, Samuel Mells is one of my best friends. I want him to be an administrator. So then they could go into the members here and they could add Samuel Mells into this. Well, we don't want that to happen. We only want them to be able to do what we've granted them permission to do. We don't want them to exploit their permissions. And that's why we don't put the security group and the user account in here. That's why we leave it. Let me go back up to where that is. Well, that's why we leave it in a different organizational unit. So in short there, the rule of thumb is never give someone delegated control over their own security group. And of course that's going to be especially true if that security group has a higher level of access or an administrator level of access. Now let me also point another thing out here, and that is in the Phoenix printers, I don't have any printers. Why is that? Well, that's because in this particular case, my domain controller is also the print server, because if I go to Start, Printers and Faxes, we see that I've installed this printer on this local computer, and I've shared it out. Okay, so now once it's been shared out on this local domain controller, however, if I double-click on DC Nugget 1, all I get is this stuff, whatever that is, you know, all the properties of the account. I still can't see that. It's really a print server, and there's not much I can do with it. So how do I manage that? Well, what you got to do is to go to View, and then you got to go to Users, Groups, and Computers as Containers, because you see in this context, this domain controller, which has a printer installed and which is being shared, is actually a container for the printer. This is how we identify it as a print server. So in terms of printers in the Phoenix organizational units, and then down here under Phoenix printers, I would have a print server in here, and it might have, you know, 3 or 4 different printers installed on it, and then they would all appear, when I look at it in this view, they would appear like this does underneath this computer account. Now you can get extremely granular over the different things that you can allow a person to do. For example, Johansson Splinkenmeyer here, this person is a junior admin that's a summer intern, and he thinks that because he's a computer science major that he knows everything. So you're a little hesitant though to let him try to show off on your network, because after all, you're the one that gets fired if something goes wrong. So you finally come up with an idea, say, hey Johansson, I got the great idea for you. I'm going to make you the zip code administrator. Yes, you see this Logan Todd person, if he moves, or if this user moves or anybody else moves and they get a different zip code on their address tab, then you're going to be the one responsible for changing this postal or zip code right here. Well, Johansson's pretty excited about that, so how are you going to manage that? Well, I could go down to the exact organizational unit if I want. I can be that particular. I can go to Delegate Control just like we did earlier. And then this time, I'm going to go ahead and click on Add. And I'm going to go ahead and add Johansson Splinkmeyer here. And then all I'm going to do in this case is choose one of these items. I don't think so, because look, these are too powerful. Create, delete, manage user accounts. Geez, I hardly even trust this person. I don't want him to do that much. Reset passwords, read all. See, I don't know if I really want him to do any of these kinds of things. So I'm going to choose a custom task to delegate and then click Next. The next thing I want him to be able to do is to manage only delegated control of specific objects, and that's going to be user objects, because the zip code is part of the user object. And I'm going to go ahead and click on Next. And then what I want him to be able to do is just some property-specific items within this, and that's going to be the ability to write the zip postal code. Now, by default, he already has the ability to read the zip or postal code, so I don't need to check that explicitly, but I could. Then I'll just go ahead and click on Next, and then that's pretty much it. Once I click Finish, Johansson Splinkmeyer, when he logs on the next time, he'll have the ability, provided I've given him an MMC console, something like this, he'll have the ability to change people's zip codes. So now here Johansson Splinkmeyer is logged on, as we can see up here, and we've added the administrative tools to his start menu, and now he goes to Active Directory users and computers, and then when he goes to the Phoenix organizational unit, and then goes to the Phoenix users down here, he can say, oh, I heard that Elsa Schmelsa moved. So we'll double click on her account, and then we'll be able to go into her address tab, and then we can only change the postal or zip code. Now, I'm going to type in here for the street, but it doesn't let me do anything. It just, nothing happens. Same with postal box, city, state, but the postal zip code, I can change that. So we've given her now this zip code, and that's what Johansson Splinkmeyer wanted. He wanted to be able to change the people's zip code, and there he goes. And having returned now to the actual domain controller, when I go to the Phoenix users organizational unit and go to properties here and go to the security tab, then we'll see that for that specific user account here, if we go to advanced, he has a very limited set of properties that he's able to work with. So if we take a look at his specific account, we see that the only thing that he can do is to write the postal zip code. Now, once again, if you want to be more granular with this, we can say we also want him to be able to, write the web page address if someone has a personal web page that they want to do or something like that. Any of these other things we want to give him the ability to be able to do, we can do that. But once again, that's the whole point. It's very granular in what you can choose that you want to have happen, and in the level of access that you grant. Now let me also point out finally here that you can rename or move any of these organizational units as necessary. For example, if the Bisbee office now moved to Benson, well, I could just hit F2, or you could do that thing just like you can with any other file name where you select it and then click it again, and then you can rename it that way. Or I can right-click and choose rename. That is now Benson. That's pretty easy to do. Other things I could do, what if all of my admins were actually located in the Benson office? Well, I could take these admins organizational unit and just drag it into Benson, and I could just let me drag and drop it. I could also right-click here and choose Move, and then it allows me to also choose this interface to choose to move it into Benson, and there it goes. So now it's part of the Benson item. Again, I can drag it right back out, so it's very easy to work with in all of this respect. Now then another way I could move this admin organizational unit into Benson would be to use a command line and to use the dsmove command. And I would just simply type in dsmove, enter in the distinguished name of the organizational unit that I want to move, OU equals admin, and the full distinguished name, and then identify a new parent, which in this case would be the OU of Benson in the same domain, and then press enter. If I can press enter, there we go. And then it's going to successfully move that OU, and if I refresh the screen here, we see that indeed it's put the admin's OU inside of Benson. Now I can also use dsmove to actually move user accounts into different organizational units and to rename those user accounts. So if I wanted to move Phoenix User 100 into the Benson organizational unit and at the same time to rename it from Phoenix User 100 to Benson User 100, I could do that using the dsmove command. And I enter in the fully distinguished name after dsmove, and then common name equals Phoenix User 100, organizational unit of Phoenix users, organizational unit of Phoenix, DC equals Nugget Lab, DC equals com, to a new parent, OU equals Benson, and then you see the rest of the distinguished name there. And then at the same time, I'm going to rename it to Benson User 100. So I'll go ahead and do all of that and press Enter. And we see that it's successfully done that. If I press refresh on my screen here, then we'll see that it's now out of the Phoenix Users organizational unit, and it is inside of the Benson organizational unit. If I refresh this, then we see that there's the Benson User 100 account now. In this nugget, we discussed organizational units, which are really just containers that contain user accounts, group accounts, computers, for the most part, those three objects. And then they contain other things as well, such as printers. But before you create organizational units, we saw that we first need to have a design strategy so that you can know what kind of a strategy you want to have. Do you want to group organizational units according to geographic location or business department or something like that? It also relates to who's going to be in charge of those organizational units and administer them. So then, once we figure that out, you can go ahead and create the OUs, which I showed you how to do quite easily through the interface and through the command line. And then we also took a look at delegation. And in addition to group policy objects, which is what we're going to discuss in the next nugget, the delegation is possibly one of the most important parts of an OU structure. And you need to understand how that works, and we showed you that. And showed you that through the delegation of control wizard, you can give people discrete control over those OUs without giving them too much power, as in adding them to the domain admins group or something like that. Then we showed you how to move organizational unit objects from one location to the next, either through the interface or, again, through the command line. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.